Welcome to AreYouAnnie, the podcast for women who have walked through fire or who are walking through fire right now to get to the other side of narcissistic abuse. No matter where you are on that journey, know this: you are gaining your strength back. You are getting your power back and your voice, and you are not alone. I'm your host, Kyle Hackley, attorney, mother, grandmother, and author of Undercurrent. This space here is to inspire and validate Annies everywhere, the women who have lived through narcissistic abuse but are finding their way back to find themselves. I'm just a woman who's passionate about being a voice for those women who identify with Annie. I'm not a therapist. What I share here is based on what I have personally seen and all of the stories of so many women who have shared with me, the women who have endured narcissistic abuse, yet are finding their way back to themselves. And today, we're returning to a subject that so many women know all too well: narcissistic rage. If you've ever been blindsided by the unpredictable anger of a narcissist, then you know the kind of fear that grips your body, the kind that leaves you walking on eggshells, trying to avoid the next blow up. And I want to dovetail that with something that perhaps can bring you back from that fear, something that I think can help you reclaim your sense of safety and control. For those of you who have been with me for a while, you know just how passionate I am about the healing power of horses, specifically the healing presence of a horse when you are in an abusive relationship. Let me ask this question. Have you ever found solace in something that's just bigger than yourself when the world just feels so unsafe? Because today we're stepping into the quiet refuge of a horse stable, where the only expectations are honesty, trust, and presence. That's what Annie Black did in Undercurrent. She says it saved her life. So I'd like to spend a little time talking about how a horse can possibly help a woman who's been shattered by rage to help her find herself again. We already know that narcissistic rage is the storm that leaves no physical wounds, generally anyway. But the resulting emotional scars, you might wonder if they will ever heal. If you ever have witnessed narcissistic rage, you know it's different than just getting angry. It's cruel, and it's always about control. It can start over nothing. When Annie Black didn't answer her telephone one night, it sent her husband Santino into a near-deadly rage. Other times, Santino might be set off because something occurred that bruised his ego, and he just had to take Annie down to regain his own power. Here's the worst part of that. After the storm, when the rage would leave Santino's eyes, he would act like nothing had happened. He wants to know, well, what are we having for dinner tonight? But Annie's still shaking. She knows from experience that she can't confront him, because if she does, her words are going to be twisted around by Santino in such a way that he's going to be demanding an apology from her. She just can't bear that. This cycle repeats over and over again until Annie started to believe she was the problem. But she wasn't the problem, and she never was the problem. And this is where the horses come in. In Undercurrent, Annie has a place where she goes when the world becomes just too much. It's not a fancy place. It's a fenced-in paddock with green grass, shade trees, and her horse Red. She goes there not to ride, not to train, just to sit in her lawn chair. Red doesn't ask anything of her. He just exists with her. Sometimes he would walk up the back of her and put his head over her shoulder and then cradle his head in the nook of her neck. And do you know that when a horse does that to a human, he's signaling a deep sense of trust toward that person. For Annie, and probably for most people, it's a moment of empowerment because the horse is essentially conveying a message. I understand you, I trust you, and I respect you. Annie also would use her quiet time with Red to write in her journal. Getting the words out of her head was so important because she certainly couldn't articulate them. She lost her voice with Santino, and this was an important step for her to reclaim it. And while speaking her truth in her journal, the weight of Santino's words would begin to fade. With her horse by her side, in the quiet of the pasture, Annie's body would relax, and in those moments, Santino's voice was not in her head. And for any woman who's ever been in that place, you understand sometimes you just need to be near someone who respects you and isn't going to hurt you. Horses are natural healers, and there's a reason for that. Their heartbeats are slower than ours. And when we're near them, our heart rate syncs with theirs. Isn't that fascinating? Their breathing is deep and steady, and it can pull us out of a panic into the present moment. Horses also respond honestly. Obviously, they're not going to play mind games with us. They don't pretend to be something they're not. And for a woman who has spent years being gaslit and manipulated, and especially for Annie Black, just being around that kind of honesty was extraordinarily healing. Anyone who's been the target of narcissistic rage knows how isolating it feels. But I want you to know you are not alone and you are not powerless. Maybe your escape isn't a horse, but find something that brings you back to yourself, a place where you can breathe, where you can exist without fear. If you have safe access to a horse, just try standing next to him and let him remind you that you are still here, that you are still strong, and that you are worthy of respect. And as always, if this message resonates with you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or share your story. send a private email to story@areyouannie.com. And if you would please push the subscribe button, you are helping another Annie to hear this message, and maybe she just needs to hear it to be validated. And if you're ready, you can ask yourself, are you Annie, or do you know an Annie? Until next time, I want you to remember that you are stronger than you know, and I want you to be tenacious and never give up on what's important to you. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.